Alright, I'm going to be showing you how to change out the crown race on the ElliptiGO. So first I'm going to show you what tools you need. Some sort of cutter to get the box open, rubber plastic hammer, a large screwdriver with a pretty blunt end, a 16mm wrench, a 5mm Allen wrench, some small type of pick. We use a dental pick, or a small screwdriver. These two are interchangeable. Okay, so first thing to do is to lift the bike out of the box so that the fork is resting out like so you can easily access it and work on the bike. You don't need to take it all the way out of the box, just like that's fine. So what we use the pick or screwdriver for is to undo this zip tie that keeps these two bags on here. So you just basically just shove it behind there and disengage the little locking mechanism. And take these bags off. I'm going to hold on to those because we'll use them to repackage the bike. So, next thing you want to do is grab your 16mm wrench and very carefully unscrew the pin. I say to be careful because the pin housing is made out of aluminum and can get marred very easily when you're trying to remove it. Oftentimes after you unscrew it a little ways, you can do the rest by hand. Use it to make sure that the pin is not going to hit the inside of the steer tube on the fork. So now you can see that the pin's no longer visible on the inside, so it can just stay where it is. Okay, so next you want to use a 5mm Allen wrench and undo all these bolts, the pinch bolt here and then the bolt on the rotating part of the collar. And you don't need to take those all the way out or anything, you just need to unscrew them so that they're loose. So we just need to get the collar off. Also just turn the rotating part counterclockwise to get it to loosen up slightly. Okay. So next we're using your rubber or plastic hammer to take the collar off. So what I usually do is just hold the fork down here, thumb wrapped around the frame, keep it all in place, and usually hit up against the quick release holder. Alright, so you want to keep this to the side. You don't really need to use it until the reinstallation. Alright, before we take the fork off, you also want to undo the brake caliper, the side that's attached to the brake cable. So we're just going to undo that. Take the bolt out, undo the housing. Just lift off that caliper and just let it dangle on the side. And it's a good idea, just so you don't lose that bolt, to just screw it back into the caliper post. And then you just need to take off this top cap, like so. And usually the fork will fall right out. So, now you have the fork off. You get the crown race off. If you have a crown race removal tool, feel free to use it, but it's oftentimes just faster to use this large blunt screwdriver and the hammer. Try to show you the best way to do this. Usually I keep the fork steady with one hand and kind of hold the screwdriver as well with that hand, and then just hammer it off. You don't need to use a lot of force. Usually just a few taps and it pops off. Alright, so then just grab a new crown race. like so. If you have a crown race setting tool for a 1.5 inch headset, feel free to use that, but since these things have a small slit in them, they're actually really easy to install by hand, so I usually recommend doing that. You want to make sure the slit is facing the rear of the fork so that dirt and debris can't get in there. So just slide that on. You want to make sure it's fully seated. Usually pops on like so. And you can tell because, you know, the inside edge of that lip on the steer tube will be showing. So now that that's installed, it can go back on the bike. Usually the first thing I'll grab when I'm putting the fork back on is this headset top cap, because that'll help keep the fork in place. So to make sure this zip tie isn't in the way, slide the fork back in. Looks like I popped out the bearing, so be wary of that. Alright, you want to make sure that you get the fork always seated against the bottom bearing. Get that top cap back on. We can reinstall the collar. Usually you can put it on by hand a little ways, then hammer it on the rest of the way. I want to make sure that these two little tabs on the top here line up with the slit that's cut in the steer tube, so that they don't mar the edges of the steer tube or anything like that when you're hammering it on. So I think I have this pretty well lined up. And just a few gentle taps. Alright, so then you're going to want to check when you're hammering it down the lip on the inside edge of the steer tube. You want to make sure that it's fully seated against the collar. You can see there's still a bit of a gap here. So oftentimes you have to check the bottom of the fork, make sure you have it fully seated against the bottom bearing, and then tap it down the rest of the way. Now you can see that this is fully seated. Next thing I usually do is screw in the steering pin, because that thing, it's the other component here that will tell you whether or not the collar is fully seated on the steer tube. So you can just screw that in by hand until it gets difficult. I'll tighten it down with the 16mm. Again, being very careful not to mar that metal. And then you want to make sure that it smoothly engages and disengages. If the collar is not seated properly, there's a chance that this pin will just stick in one position or the other, just be very difficult to manipulate. So that is seated. And we can move on to tightening down these bolts. So you want to tighten down the pinch bolt first, because that'll keep the collar in place. And what's the torque spec on that? It's supposed to be like 10? 8. Okay, so it's supposed to be about 8 Newton meters. Don't really have to tighten the quick release down, but I like to, just to keep it out of the way. And then when it comes to adjusting the headset, you're going to make sure that this rotating collar allows for smooth operation of the headset, but not enough play that you could wiggle back and forth. So right now, I mean, the best way to, I guess, check for the play would just be to hold the bike, the head tube, and the steering collar, and try to move the collar back and forth. And if you feel any kind of wiggle, you'll know that this thing needs to be tightened down. There isn't any wiggle in this right now, which you probably won't be able to see, but it's good. So I'm just going to tighten this down. And one thing you want to watch for after you tighten it down is that this mechanism will oftentimes also put a little bit more pressure on the headset as it's getting tighter. So after that's tightened, you want to make sure that it's still moving freely, but not wiggling. And yeah, it doesn't feel like it's binding at all. So this feels pretty good. Also checking to make sure there isn't any kind of noise coming out of the crank race, and there isn't. So that is pretty much set. The last step is just to put the brake caliper back on. It's very easy. Just want to make sure that you line up the spring guide there in the center hole on the post. That way it'll keep the spring tension even between both sides and make the brakes work properly. So you just slide that in. Should go in pretty easily. Put the bolt back through the front of the caliper. Let's put the little noodle nut back on so the brake's all set. Then, last thing to do is just bag up the fork. And that's pretty much it. One on top, one on bottom. And then just get a little overlap and tighten down that zip tie. And there you have it. That's pretty much it. So, yeah, good going.